Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech Podcast. It's me, Charlie Sell, the board director of Major Group, where I get a chance to speak to thought leaders, industry leaders, people who are just passionate about helping to promote STEM careers and have made careers within the technology sector as a whole. And I am really, really pleased to have Daniel Turhurst North with me today. Daniel, he's not only a public speaker and author, he is an agile, he'll may tell me if I'm saying this, I believe an agile guru, in his thoughts about how companies can really embrace modern day methodologies, modern day techniques. And his career has spanned 30 years, with a key part of it at Thoughtworks, and anyone in the industry will know just how highly regarded Thoughtworks is in regards to an agile consultancy, and a lot of the stuff that Daniel was involved in whilst working there has become key principles that a lot of businesses adopt today. So we're actually very, very lucky to have him on the podcast. And I was introduced to him actually via a conference that he's also speaking at again in a couple of weeks, called CCon. So Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Charlie.
Let's jump straight in and let's find a bit about your story. How did you get into technology, and tell us a bit about your career?
So I have an accidental career, is the way I describe it. I I've made 30 years. I've made I think two career decisions in that 30 years. The rest of it has just been a series of happy accidents. So I went a fairly traditional route. I did maths and computer science, although I did maths and computer science in the 80s when it wasn't much of a thing yet. So and it was one of these 4-year degree courses with kind of thin sandwich, like a 6-month placement every year. And the saying went that you learn all the maths that you learn at college, and all of the computer science you learn on the job. So,
Yeah.
so I graduated in 1991 in the middle of a recession. So this was after the big crash of '87. There was a recession in 1991. I graduated with a 2-1 honours degree in maths and computer science. Whoop whoop. And then immediately was unemployed. Uh, desperately trying to find work. I actually signed on, but I was unemployed officially for about 3 months, um, and I was trying all the things, sending out reams and reams of CVs. And then there was a job fair in Islington. I think it's still going, the Islington Job Fair, and take over this big building in Islington, and all these companies turn up, and they're all fairly identical little booths, and I turned up with my briefcase full of printed copies of my CV. Um, and I went around in all these banks and insurance companies and all the usual kind of characters, and CV after CV after CV. And I was just thinking, I'm not going to hear from any of you. Right? And then just as the place was wrapping up and people were kind of packing down their stalls, I walked past this stall and they just had some really cool artwork on their booth. And I said to them, "That's really cool artwork." And they said, "Well, actually, we do electronic pre-press." And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, pre-press is before they print magazines and newspapers and all of that. You print kind of mock-up copies to make sure everything's in the right place." And so there's a lot of kind of color calculations and quite funky, big computery things going on. And I said, "Oh, that sounds really cool." And gave them my CV, expecting to hear nothing, and then accidentally landed a job. So I was basically on my way out the door, about to put all my CVs in the bin, and it was like the last thing I passed. So that's where I started, and then my next job was a data marketing company. I never chose, I never thought, you know what I think you need to do next? I need to do data marketing. So I didn't really do that. I think what I did was I tended to stay places until I felt I'd outgrown them, or I wanted to do the next thing, and the opportunity for the next thing wasn't there, and started looking around. So then during the 90s, it was mostly kind of big-ish jobs. So, banks and things. And then late 90s, about 97, 98, I went independent as a contractor. Thought I'd try contracting. And this is kind of a teaser for later on in our chat, 'cause I know you're going to talk about advice for people looking for looking for work and looking to break into the industry. What I discovered as a contractor is that everyone is rubbish at interviewing, like everyone. Right? It's a skill. And when I joined ThoughtWorks, jumping forward a bit, I suddenly discovered that it is a skill and it is learnable, and that good interviewers are incredible and also very rare. And what that means, if you've got your wits about you, is as soon as you're in an interview, you can steer it where you want to go. So I did my first interview as a contractor. I was for a C++ job. I was literally reading the C++ book on the way to the interview. I'd never done any C++, but like this was the contract that was up. So I was reading the O'Reilly C++ core language book on the train. And then I got into the interview, and about 10 minutes into this interview, I thought, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to interview me. I'm going to just take charge of this. And so I basically steered the interview into, you want to hire me, don't you? And they said, we want to hire you, don't we? And so a Jedi mind trick. And got this contract and ended up as their like senior C++ person. And so once you've seen behind the curtain, it's not the big wizard, it's just little people pulling levers. It's suddenly everywhere. And so then I joined a startup and during the dot bomb era, around 2000, 2001, joined a startup, was the VP of engineering, which means I hired 3 people. And then their funding vanished, so that went. And I was unemployed again. And then I accidentally joined Thoughtworks. Now, for those that don't know, Thoughtworks is a very high profile software consultancy. They've been going for like 30 odd years. They started in 91, I think, in Chicago. Now completely global, thousands, tens of thousands of people. And but when I was there, it was a lot smaller, maybe 1,500 people. And I was the first tech hire in the London office. I didn't know any of this, right? So a friend of mine who's a sorry, my little doggy is insisting on coming into the office. The joys of home working. A friend of mine who's a brilliant programmer and someone I look up to a lot. He said, have you heard of Thoughtworks? And I said, yeah, I think so. He said, what do you know about them? I said, well, I think they sound all right. He said, good, because I've sent them your CV. I was like, sorry? He said, well, they interviewed me and they asked me if I know anyone, and I know you, so I sent them your CV. And it was a really bad, it was like an out-of-date CV, and I hadn't smartened it up in ages and whatever else. Anyway, they called me in for an interview, and I met some people, and I had no idea who these people were who I met. And I'm so glad, because I would have been terrified. I get really bad imposter syndrome. And it turns out that the people that they invited were... sorry. We can cut this, right?
Yeah.
It turned out the people that were interviewing me, my project manager to be was a lady called Rebecca Parsons, who it turns out is Dr. Rebecca Parsons, who's Thoughtworks kind of global emeritus CTO. Oh, okay. And then the guy who was my first tech lead there, a guy called Matt Femmel, he invented continuous integration. I'm like, what?
Wow.
I mean, someone had to, right?
Yeah.
It was him. Well, or at least, no, he wrote the first continuous integration server, if you like. He wrote cruise control. And basically the bar at this place was insanely high, and I don't know how I snuck in under it. But I ended up staying there for most of 2000s. I got to 2002, stayed there to 2009. And it was an absolute kind of crucible of crazy agile creativity. There was continuous delivery came out of that time, behavior-driven development came out of that time, deliberate discovery came out of that time. Lots of ways of, I don't know, getting teams to work really effectively, all kind of just happen to coalesce from that group of people. And there's folks like Jez Humble, Dave Farley, Liz Keogh, sort of people who are like industry giants, were all just like happened to be in the same building. And that was crazy fun. And then I left there in 2010 and joined a trading firm for a couple of years, writing code again, which was fun. And then since then, so the last 10 years or so, I've been independent. And the way I describe it now is I go into large companies and I cause mischief. So, and that could be, that's technology stuff, that's people stuff, that's leadership stuff, that's organizational stuff. So what I tend to do is I tend to go in and take a look around and listen. The key is to listen and figure out where people are stuck and how to accelerate them. And then work with them. And make them famous. Like, they're the ones who are doing the work. I'm just kind of nudging a bit. And that's super exciting. So that's what I've been up to for the last 10 years. And I just finished with a 5-year engagement where I built a small team. I'm usually independent, but I built a small team with this massive client in India. And it was just the most crazy fun. And that finished a few months ago. And I've just taken a bit of time to decompress.
Yeah.
and now I'm just kind of just about to go back out into the world again. So that's where you meet me.
Wow, fantastic! And I remember when we one of our catch ups, you also said that one of your skills is to get people talking to each other. You know, the realities of the bigger the business, that one of the quickest and most impactful fixes is connecting people, isn't it? Have you spoken to so and so? Are you guys actually working together on things? Um,
Well, yeah, and funny enough, you mentioned Seacon at the beginning there. I'm putting my talk together for Seacon at the moment. I tend to do this, sort of leave it till fairly late. But also, I'm a big fan. I'm going to just plug Seacon here. It's basically this entire thing is driven by this one guy's passion. This guy Barry, and he is just passionate about enterprise. Getting organisations kind of trying to work sensibly. And there's far too few people having this conversation. And I've been, I think, to all of them so far, certainly most of them. And each year, it's almost like a waypoint for me. It's like, okay, what am I talking about at this year's CCon? It's kind of where I'm at, you know. And where I'm at the moment is exactly that. And I'm looking at Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about the difference between a scarcity mindset and a abundance mindset. So scarcity is zero sum game. You know, if I give you something, I'm losing out. You know, and when we get talking in a moment, we're going to be talking about equity and equality and those kind of things. Is that a lot of the reason that the kind of the incumbent, the folks at the top kind of push back on that is they're terrified of losing something, losing status, losing money, whatever it is. An abundance mindset says, if I give to you, we both grow. You know, and it's not about slicing up the pie and fighting over the pie. It's about figuring out how to make a bigger pie. Right? And when you get into that win-win kind of mentality, suddenly there's a load more options. And so a lot of what I do is try and see where those opportunities are.
wow, that's yeah, as you say, you know, seeing those opportunities and being the incumbent, I think, yeah, it really does sort of show the value of what people have when they do these things. And so let's move into, you know, we discussed again when we were having our original catch up. I know what a massive believer you are in promoting women in tech, but also, you know, and the wider diversity piece. Talk me, you've got some quite strong rules, haven't you? You know, to be able to walk the walk and not just be a tick box. You've got quite strong views, haven't you, on how to really help that cause.
So yeah, I mean, there's a number of different kind of voices, if you like, or types of voice. So I know there are some folks in the tech space who are like angry, shouty, militant, and we need those voices. We need people kind of going and rattling at the doors. What I try to be is a bit more subversive and a bit more kind of persuasive, if you like, trying to bring people on the journey. So, you know, my data point, my baseline, if you like, is 51% of the planet is women. 51% of most populations around the world, it's fairly evenly distributed, are women, right? And yet, you know, 3% or 5% of top board positions, or, you know, when you go into any large tech organization, the proportion of women is tiny. When you go to tech events, tech conferences, all the t-shirts are male t-shirts, right? You don't get, you know, there's a few kind of forward looking at your QCons and your go-tos and some of those events where they actually, you know, encourage their vendors or whatever, their sponsors to produce women's cut t-shirts. It's just things like that. But no, I've got a couple of hard rules. I won't appear on a panel of all men. I won't appear in a conference where the lineup is all men. I actually told one conference off. I just remembered. I told one conference off one year, and they said, "Yeah, do you want to come and speak?" And this is one of the things I can. I'm in this amazing position of privilege, right? So I've over the last 20 odd years, I've built a reputation as a speaker, and I get invited to speak. I tend to not kind of submit papers. I get people say, "Daniel, do you want to come and speak at our event?" And it's a huge privilege. And so I try and kind of leverage that a bit. And I said to them, I said, you know, I'd love to come and speak at your event. What I'm seeing now is 20 speakers and like there's one non-white person and no women. And what's up with that? I said, I'm going to keep an eye on your conference and hit me up in a few years. And about 3 years later, they came back to me. I said, you might not remember us. And I looked at their website and about half the speakers were women. I was like,
Yes.
yes, I'll speak at your event.
Yeah.
I had no idea this had all gone on. And generally, I like to co-present when I do talks. I like to co-present with women again. and it's about giving someone who's less experienced or less has less exposure a bit of a platform. There was, when we were talking before, I was telling you, wonderful lady, Linda Rising, Dr. Linda Rising, PhD, in her 80s now. She, for her 70th birthday, to herself, she completed her PhD. I love this woman. She can do no wrong. And she did some research about gender mix in teams. And she came up with some research that teams increase in performance, that their effectiveness as a team increases the higher the proportion of women in the team, up to and including all women. Right. so my corollary of this is teams get less bad when you take the men out. And if you look at the history of computing, in the 60s, it was all women. Admiral Grace Hopper invented the compiler, invented a lot of the computing that we use now. She was this huge brain, brilliant lady. And I give talks about Admiral Hopper. I'm such a fan. And then what happened was IBM in the 60s introduced a recruiting test, that happened to massively skew white male. And that basically broke the industry. And that style of test and that style of recruiting carried on. And now suddenly you end up with this very, and obviously the kind of the startup culture can be very kind of misogynistic. But even generally there's microaggressions, there's subtle sexism all the time. So I generally, when I'm working with a client, I seek to kind of give the women more of a voice, bring them more forward, front and center. Where there are opportunities where I'm going to need to ally with someone, I'll ally with someone who's a woman in that organization. And it's just habit now. And generally it works better because these are often brilliant people. Like, there's two ways to look at this. You're in a meeting with a woman and you're either thinking, oh, I know how you got here, right? Because you're female and token and blah. Or there's, wow, you're in this room and you're female. You must have worked at least half as hard again as anyone else around this table to get here, right? Because the odds are stacked against you. And so, I find generally that the women in an organization, particularly senior women in an organization, have better understanding of the organization, better understanding of the culture, better ability to navigate it, better relationships with key stakeholders around the place, and they make better allies, right? And so it's not entirely altruistic.
Yeah, yeah, and you're totally right. It's absolutely not altruistic when there's empirical evidence of the commercial benefits, not just the societal benefits of being of
Absolutely.
embracing diversity. It's
Yeah.
it dumbfounds me sometimes when people don't actually realise that there's many benefits to being open-minded, I guess, and to have trailblazers like yourself that will actually walk the walk and turn down a gig or actively go and give people a platform to be able to develop themselves. I think testament to you, and if all of us, if more of us can do, and it's the little things, isn't it? You don't have to suddenly become a rallying on weekends to be able to promote
No. No. Well,
a fair agenda.
an example is just watching the dynamics in a room or on a call, right? And in general, men will talk over women. There's a load of statistics about the proportion of airtime that men take in meetings over women. One of the things that came out of, and I think was this GitHub or one of the big tech companies, maybe Spotify, during the pandemic, one of the things they noticed was that with Zoom calls, with virtual meetings, you tended to get a lot more equity in terms of airtime. It's harder for a male voice or a guy to dominate a meeting when it's just a bunch of squares on a screen, looking like the Brady Bunch. No one is going to get that reference. But it turned out they discovered that women got a lot more airtime in meetings and got a lot more of a voice in meetings. But I'll if I'm in a meeting and you can see that someone's hogging the airtime, someone's not letting other people speak, and you can just say, okay, can we hear from Claire? or Stephanie started saying something, and I don't think she'd finished. Shut up and stop interrupting. You can't really say that. Like, just like, can you finish your point? And you just give them the floor. And again, this is using my male white privilege. Is I can be just as much of a speaky uppy, dominate the thing, but I'll then use it to hand over the conch.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's just backing up this walking the walk, isn't it? Which is just fantastic. And so,
And I get it wrong. I get it wrong, and I stuff it up. And 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 then I get little quiet voices going, "Hey, you just stuffed that up." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I did it again." Like, always learning. Right?
yeah, well, and that's the other thing. We are always learning, aren't we? And I guess time absolutely flies by when I speak to people with so much passion of their subject. And again, with this podcast, we're quickly getting to the but it's brilliant. It's exactly the purpose of this. And so moving on to the last part and thinking about that career advice. You've obviously had that very wide career spanning, and you've seen a lot of businesses, and it sounds to me like you've helped a lot of people throughout their career. When you think about that one or two bits of advice we could give that young person to be able to stand out, be able to get their foot in the door, what would it be?
I was thinking about this because you laid me this challenge when we spoke last week. I think there's two things, and they go back to this: anyone who's interviewing you is probably rubbish at interviewing, right? And this is hard. It's hard, especially if you're a fresh, shiny, bushy-tailed graduate, right? And you're going into those first interviews. What the advice I'm going to give you is easy to say. It's really hard to do. Is to not be afraid, right? Their organization is just as dysfunctional as anywhere you've ever been. They need you. They need your help. They're interviewing you because they want you to come and help them, right? And if you flip that around, you suddenly your physiology changes. The power dynamic changes. Now, a good interviewer. Let me tell you what I think great interviewing is. Great interviewing is two things. It's evidence based, and it's setting you up to succeed. Those are the two things it is. So if an interviewer is looking to get evidence, and there's different kinds of evidence, I could go right into interview theory. One of the things that Thoughtworks did brilliantly was its recruiting. Set up by a guy called John Hundreiser, who's I think is an absolute recruiting guru. And then a lady called Susie Edwards then took that model and kind of evolved it, developed it for the UK. Two massive recruiting brains, and I learned a lot of recruiting from them. Interviewing is hard. So when you get an interviewer who wants to put you at your ease, who wants you at your best, right? If they're being tricksy, you're done. Because if they're being tricksy in an interview, what are they going to be like as a colleague? Right? You do not want to work in that company. So if they are trying to give you the best possible opportunity to be your best self in that interview, brilliant. That's good signal. They want you. They want to hire you. They want you to come and help them. So if you go in with that mindset of like, I've already got this job. I'm someone they want. And then it's a conversation. I want to learn about you as much as you want to learn about me. And the advice I give when I sit down to interview someone, I say to them, right, we've got a bunch of time. I never say how long. If I can close it when I need to, right? So we've got a bunch of time. I'm after two things here. I want to leave this conversation with either, yeah, Charlie, I really want to take this forward. I'm very excited about this. Or I'm not sure this is going to be a great fit, and here's some really actionable feedback. And I want you to leave this conversation with a buying decision. You want to do this or you don't. And if we don't achieve those two things, we just failed, right? If you don't have enough to go away with and think about and say, Daniel, I love that conversation. I love what the opportunity is. I love how you position this organization. I really want to do this. Or, thanks for the opportunity. I really don't think I'm right here because I gave you the information you need to make that call. Then I'm winning at interview. And sadly, most interviews don't give you that. And this is what I mean about taking charge. If you're about halfway through the interview and you're thinking, I know nothing about your company, right? It's all been bum, 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 bum about me. I don't know anything about, the job, the team, the tech, the culture, the human beings. When do I get to meet the rest of the team? If that's not happening, then I'm already getting, my spidey tingles already going about this interview.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And that is a brilliant piece of advice. Well, not only actually for our young people listening, but anyone who's stepping into their first interviewing roles, leadership roles. That is authenticity, isn't it?
Oh no, honestly, interviewing. Well, no, I would say interviewing is hard. Is not fair. Interviewing is a skill, like any other skill, and you can get better at it by practicing it. But there's some fundamentals that you need to know. There's different types of evidence. There's different ways to ask a question. There's different ways to ask the same question several times. Complete tangent. I went to Israel a few years ago for a conference, and walking through Tel Aviv airport. And Tel Aviv airport is unlike, if you've been to the US or UK or whatever, there's all these machines and blah and and people with guns and stuff. Tel Aviv doesn't have any of that. It's just this big open space that you walk through. Okay. And I was walking through there, and this lady just appeared from nowhere out of the shadows, military lady, and said, "Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" No, not at all. What are you here for? I'm here for an interview. Da, da, da. She spoke to me for about less than 7 minutes, I reckon. She asked me the same question about 7 different ways. Right? I know if I had been coming in for nefarious reasons, she would have figured that out. Yeah. Like her ability to read the situation, to read me, to read my answers, to figure, and this is what I mean. So her job, and her country's like security depends on her ability to interview in a very short period of time. And boy, was she good. Right? And I felt safe. I felt like I'm coming into this country and I'm going to be okay, right? Because you're going to get the baddies, yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously that's it all, dialed up to 11. Another reference that a lot of people won't get. But that's it dialed up to 11, and then uh, but interviewing generally is about, can you surface the evidence you need while the other person is at their ease, because actually someone at their ease is much easier to ask them about stuff. If someone's
Yeah.
second guessing you or trying to give you the answer that you want to hear rather than what they actually know, you end up just talking yourself in circles.
Yeah.
So yes. So the other bit of advice I give you is practice interviewing.
Yeah. 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 Brilliant. Daniel, thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating episode, and especially your story about two accidents creating a career, which I don't quite believe, but I understand where you're coming from. But that confidence interview from the very first bit of you learning the C++ book before the interview and having that confidence to go in there and
I mean, this
control
is
and
not
own it.
apocryphal. It's not apocryphal. This literally happened. I remember sitting on the train with C++, the core language, going,
Yeah.
"This looks enough like C that I reckon I can blag it."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then all the way through to what wonderful value set you have about, as we discussed in depth, about being able to create equality and providing a platform, promoting women in tech, but also just much more diverse thought than that. All the way through to some, yeah, just really really sound career advice for our young people listening. So time has flown by. So Daniel, thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast.
That's such a pleasure, Charlie. Really lovely to meet you.
Yeah,
Good to talk to
really
you.
is. Great. And to our listeners, that's another episode of Future Tech. So it's again, remind to everyone, it's sponsored by the STEM Ambassador Association and it's shared on our network, along with on the website majorgroup.com/podcasts and our Spotify channel. So to all our listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of Future Tech. Another big thank you to Daniel. And this is another episode done. Thank you.